Have you ever had that person in your life who believed in you when no one else did? Someone who saw your greatness long before you could see it yourself? For Steph Curry, that person had a name, Jessica Chen. And in 2005, she was the only thing standing between him and completely giving up on his dreams. Charlotte, North Carolina. Summer was ending, and the suffocating heat of August made every basketball practice a battle against exhaustion. On the court at Charlotte Christian School, a skinny 17-year-old boy was shooting three-pointers with a precision that defied his fragile appearance. Steph Curry weighed only 139 pounds soaking wet, was constantly ignored by college scouts, and carried the burden of being Del Curry's son without having inherited his father's imposing physique. Great friendships are born when someone sees our light, even when we are in our darkest days. And in that summer of 2005, Jessica Chen was, literally, the only light in the darkness of doubt that consumed Steph's mind. Jessica was sitting in the empty bleachers, as she had done every afternoon for 3 years, timing Steph's shots and recording his statistics in a worn notebook. At 17 years old, she already demonstrated a maturity that impressed the adults around her. The daughter of Korean immigrants, Jessica had inherited from her parents an unshakable work ethic and an ability to see potential where others saw only limitations. "Steph, you made 47 out of 50 three-point shots today," she shouted from the bleachers. "That's 94% accuracy. Do you know how many NBA players can do that in practice?" Steph stopped dribbling and looked at her with that tired smile that had become his trademark during those difficult days. It was possible to perceive that he was exhausted not just physically, but emotionally. Every no from a university, every comment about his size, every unfavorable comparison with other players was eroding his confidence day by day. "Jessica, I don't know if that matters," he said, walking toward the bleachers. "Coach Johnson said today that maybe I should consider other options for college. Said that college basketball might not be for me." How many times in life do we hear words that can destroy our dreams if we don't have someone special to remind us of who we really are? Jessica came down from the bleachers with a determination that made Steph stop, lamenting instantly. She had that rare ability to transform moments of despair into fuel for growth. "Steph Curry," she said, looking directly into his eyes, "do you remember what I told you on the first day we met?" Steph smiled for the first time that day. How could he forget? 3 years earlier, on the first day of high school, Jessica had approached him after watching a practice and declared with the confidence of a prophet, "You're going to play in the NBA. I don't know when, I don't know how, but you will. And when that happens, I'll be in the front row cheering." "You said I was going to play in the NBA," Steph murmured. "And I keep saying it," Jessica replied, with a firmness that cut through the air like a blade. "Steph, you have something that can't be taught, that can't be bought, that can't be manufactured. You have magic in your hands." What's most impressive is how Jessica could see beyond the obvious physical limitations and perceive the transcendent talent that Steph carried within himself. They sat in the bleachers, as they did every afternoon after practice. This had become their sacred tradition. Steph would vent his frustrations, Jessica would remind him of his greatness, and together they would plan strategies to overcome the next obstacles. "Jess, sometimes I wonder if I'm living an impossible dream," Steph confessed. "Maybe I should accept that I'm just an ordinary kid from Charlotte who will never be big enough for this sport." Jessica opened her notebook and showed page after page of meticulously recorded statistics. Not just shooting numbers, but detailed analyses of his movements, comparisons with professional players, evolution charts that she had created herself. Steph, do you want to know the difference between you and 99% of the players I've ever seen? She asked, flipping through the pages. They play basketball. You create art. Every shot of yours has something that can't be copied. It has soul. Something that touches deeply is when someone sees our uniqueness, even when we're convinced we're just another one in the crowd. Besides, Jessica continued, you're forgetting something important. You're not trying to be the next LeBron James or Shaquille O'Neal. You're creating something completely new, something the world hasn't seen yet. In that moment, sitting in the bleachers of a school in Charlotte, Jessica had planted a seed that would lead Steph to revolutionize world basketball. She had been the first person to see that his physical disadvantage could be his greatest advantage if he developed a unique playing style. Great friendships are born when someone sees our light, even when we are in our darkest days. And that summer, Jessica was literally the guardian of Steph's dreams. During the following weeks, Jessica developed what she called Project Steph Curry. She researched universities that valued skill over size, analyzed statistics of small players who had succeeded, and even wrote letters to college coaches highlighting Steph's unique qualities that didn't show up in traditional statistics. "Jess, you don't need to do all this for me," Steph said one afternoon, seeing her with piles of papers and statistics spread across the library table. "Steph," she replied, without lifting her eyes from the papers, "do you think I'm doing this for you?" "Aren't you?" Jessica finally looked at him, and there was an intensity in her eyes that Steph had never seen before. "I'm doing this because I believe you're going to change the way people see basketball. And when that happens, I want to be able to say, I helped plant that seed." It was impossible not to feel the force of Jessica's conviction. She wasn't just supporting a friend. She was investing in a vision of the future that only she could see clearly. Naturally, this leads us to question: how many times in life do we find someone who not only believes in our dreams, but is willing to actively work to make them reality? In September 2005, the call that would change everything finally came. Davidson College offered Steph a scholarship. It wasn't Duke, it wasn't North Carolina, but it was a real chance to play college basketball and pursue his NBA dream. "Jess! Jess!" Steph ran through the school looking for Jessica until he found her in the library. "Davidson! They want me to go to Davidson." Jessica dropped the books she was carrying and ran to hug him. It was possible to perceive that moment represented much more than a scholarship. It was the validation of everything she had seen in Steph since day one. "I knew it," she said, with tears in her eyes. "I always knew this would happen." They spent the entire afternoon planning what the Davidson experience would be like, what challenges Steph would face, how he could stand out in a smaller program to eventually reach the NBA. Great friendships are born when someone sees our light even when we are in our darkest days, and Jessica had been the guardian of that light during Steph's most difficult years. But then came August 2006, and it was time for Steph to leave for Davidson. The night before his departure, they met one last time on the court where it all began. "Steph," Jessica said, handing him a wrapped gift. "Don't open it now. Open it when you feel lost, when you doubt yourself, when you need to remember who you really are." "Jess, how am I going to do this without you?" Steph asked, his voice choked with emotion. "You've been my anchor all these years." "You won't be doing this without me," Jessica replied. You'll be doing it because of me, because of us, because of everything we built together. They made a promise that night, holding hands at center court, where Steph had spent thousands of hours perfecting his shot. No matter what happens, Steph said, no matter how famous I become, how busy I get, how big my life becomes, we'll always be best friends. Always, Jessica confirmed. How is it possible that a promise made by two 18-year-old teenagers could seem so sacred and at the same time so fragile? The next morning, Steph left for Davidson. Jessica stood at her bedroom window, watching his car disappear into the distance, holding a notebook full of statistics and memories from 3 years of friendship that had shaped both their destinies. What neither of them knew was that this would be the last time they would be together as best friends. Life was about to take them in directions that would test their promise in ways they couldn't even imagine. Great friendships are born when someone sees our light, even when we are in our darkest days. And Jessica Chen had been the first person to see the light that Steph Curry would bring to the entire world. But some lights shine so intensely that they end up overshadowing even those who first recognized them. But what happened next would change everything forever. There is a particular cruelty in how distance and success can erode even the most solid friendships. How is it possible that two people who promised to always be together can become strangers without even realizing exactly when that happened? For Jessica Chen and Steph Curry, this painful discovery came gradually, like invisible erosion that doesn't stop until everything that once seemed eternal becomes just a distant memory. September 2006. Steph had arrived at Davidson only 2 weeks earlier, but was already completely immersed in a reality that had nothing to do with the life he knew in Charlotte. Intensive training, college classes, pressure to adapt to a completely new level of competition. Everything conspired to consume every minute of his day. Great promises are tested not by great events, but by the constant erosion of small forgettings. And Steph was about to discover how sincere promises can get lost in the rush of life. Jessica called every night during the first weeks, eager to hear about every practice, every class, every new teammate. Steph answered religiously, telling details about how strange it was to be away from home, how the other players were bigger and stronger, how he was struggling to find his place on the team. "Jess, they put me as 6th man," Steph said during one of those calls. "Coach Bob McKillop thinks I need to mature physically before being a starter." "Steph, remember what we always talked about adversity?" Jessica responded, her voice carrying that wisdom that always calmed him. "It's just opportunity in disguise. You'll show them that size doesn't define talent." It was possible to perceive that Jessica was still totally invested in Steph's success, following every game on the internet, reading every article about Davidson, keeping her own statistics on his progress. During the first year, communication remained consistent. Jessica watched all the games she could find online, sent supportive messages before every important match, and celebrated every victory as if she herself were on the court. But something was changing, almost imperceptibly. What's most impressive is how college life had opened a completely new world for Steph, a world where Jessica had no natural place. Steph began making friends at Davidson, going out with teammates, experiencing the independence that comes with living away from home. His calls to Jessica, which previously happened religiously every night, began to be spaced out. First, every other day, then a few times a week, then only on weekends. Great promises are tested not by great events, but by the constant erosion of small forgettings. And each call not made was a small crack in the foundation of their friendship. Jessica noticed, of course. How could she not notice? She who had organized her life around Steph's journey, who had planned to go to UNC Charlotte specifically to stay geographically close when he went to Davidson, who still maintained an updated notebook with his statistics. She noticed every subtle change. March 2008 changed everything. Steph exploded in March Madness, taking Davidson on an unlikely run to the Elite Eight. Suddenly, he wasn't just a skinny kid from Charlotte anymore. He was a national sensation. ESPN played his highlights on loop, journalists wanted interviews, and Davidson became the favorite destination for college basketball fans across the country. Jessica watched every game of Davidson's run with a mixture of pride and melancholy that she couldn't completely explain. It was exactly what she had predicted 3 years earlier, but somehow it didn't feel like she had imagined. "I always knew this would happen," she told her parents after watching Steph score 40 points against Gonzaga. "I always knew he would be special." But there was a strange pain in her voice, as if she were celebrating something she was simultaneously losing. Something that touches deeply is realizing that sometimes our dreams, for the people we love, come true exactly as we expected, except for the part where we still are part of their lives. Steph tried to call Jessica after the victory over Gonzaga, but was surrounded by cameras, reporters, and team celebrations. When he finally got a private moment, it was too late to call. "I'll call tomorrow," he thought. But tomorrow brought more training, more interviews, more pressure. Jessica watched his press conference on television, where he thanked everyone who believed in me from the beginning. She expected to be mentioned specifically, as she used to be in private conversations between them. But she wasn't. It was a small, understandable omission, without ill intent. But for Jessica, it felt as if 3 years of unconditional friendship had been erased from history. She tried calling him that night, and the next, and the next. The calls went straight to voicemail, which was always full. Naturally, this leads us to question, when exactly does a friendship die? Is it in a specific moment of confrontation, or is it in the accumulation of small moments where we choose other priorities? During the summer of 2008, Steph returned to Charlotte, but he was a different version of the boy who had left 2 years earlier. He was still kind, still humble, but there was an energy around him that didn't exist before. People wanted his attention constantly. His phone rang non-stop. Every trip to the mall became an impromptu autograph session. Jessica tried to maintain the tradition of their afternoon court sessions, but now Steph trained with a professional physical trainer, had commitments with local sponsors, participated in charity events that required his presence as local star. "Steph, do you have time for our end-of-afternoon tradition?" Jessica asked during one of the few times she managed to talk to him that summer. "Of course, Jess," he replied, but there was a distraction in his voice that she recognized immediately. "It's just that this week is kind of busy. How about next week?" Next week never came. Great promises are tested not by great events, but by the constant erosion of small forgettings. And Steph was discovering how difficult it is to maintain connections from the past when the present becomes overwhelmingly demanding. Jessica began her own college life at UNC Charlotte, diving into studies with the same dedication she had previously applied to supporting Steph. She chose education as her major, inspired by the way she had been able to see and nurture Steph's potential when no one else could. During her first college year, she still obsessively followed his career. She watched all Davidson games, read every article, kept updated statistics. But now, it was like watching the life of a distant celebrity, not her best friend. Steph's final season at Davidson, 2008 to 2009, was even more spectacular than the previous one. He broke records, dominated sports, headlines, and began being mentioned as a possible first-round draft pick. Jessica watched Steph's last college game with tears in her eyes, not just because he was graduating, but because she knew it represented the definitive end of the era when she had been an important part of his journey. She tried to send a congratulations message after graduation. Steph replied, "Thank you, Jess. It means a lot coming from you." It was a polite, even affectionate response. But there was a formality in it that broke something inside Jessica. It was the kind of response Steph would give to any fan, any Charlotte acquaintance, any person from his past. It was impossible not to feel that she had become exactly that, a person from the past. The 2009 NBA draft was broadcast live on television. Jessica watched alone in her college dorm room, holding the gift she had given Steph on the eve of his departure to Davidson. A gift he had never opened, because he had never needed it. With the seventh pick of the 2009 draft, the Golden State Warriors select Steph Curry from Davidson College. Jessica cried when she heard his name called. She cried with pride, she cried with joy, but mainly she cried because she knew that moment marked the definitive distance between them. Steph Curry was no longer the insecure 139-pound boy who needed her conviction to believe in himself. He was an NBA star, living in a reality that was light years away from her life. How is it possible to celebrate the success of someone you love, and, at the same time, mourn the loss of that someone? That night, Jessica closed the notebook where she kept Steph's statistics and put it in a drawer. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but because it hurt too much to continue documenting the life of someone who had become a stranger. Great promises are tested not by great events, but by the constant erosion of small forgettings. And Jessica had discovered that some promises break not through betrayal, but through pure growth in different directions. Steph tried to call her a few times during his first weeks in Golden State, but the time zone difference, the intensity of professional life, and the strangeness that had developed between them made conversations increasingly spaced out and superficial. The last time they talked was in December 2009. Steph called on Jessica's birthday, a tradition they had maintained since they were 15 years old. "Happy birthday, Jess," he said, and there was genuine nostalgia in his voice. "Thank you, Steph," she replied. "How's the NBA?" They talked for 20 minutes about basketball, about college, about family. It was a pleasant conversation, but there was a polite formality that both felt but neither commented on. When they hung up, both knew it would be the last time. There was no fight, no harsh words, no dramatic moment of separation. Simply, two people who had once been inseparable discovered they had grown in directions that didn't include each other. And so, without fanfare or ceremony, one of the most important friendships in Steph Curry's formation dissolved into distance, time, and the relentless reality that some connections, no matter how special, cannot survive the radical transformations that life imposes. No one could have imagined that that moment would be the turning point. There is a cruel irony in destiny that places two people who were once inseparable in the same city, breathing the same air, walking the same streets, but living in completely parallel universes. How is it possible to be so geographically close and so emotionally distant from someone who once knew every secret of your soul? Between 2010 and 2024, Jessica Chen and Steph Curry discovered exactly how this irony works, building extraordinary lives in the same Oakland without their paths crossing even once. Jessica arrived in Oakland in August 2012 at 24 years old with an education degree from UNC Charlotte and a heart determined to make a difference in the lives of children who, like Steph once was, needed someone who could see their potential when no one else could. Great lives are built when we transform our pain into purpose. And Jessica was about to discover that the experience of nurturing Steph's talent had been just the first chapter of a much larger mission. She accepted a job at Oakland Opportunity Academy, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing education and mentoring for children from underserved communities. It was exactly the kind of work that made her heart vibrate, identifying potential where others saw only limitations, believing in dreams that seemed impossible, being the voice that whispers, "You can do it," when the whole world is shouting, "You can't." What's most impressive is that Jessica had chosen Oakland without knowing it was the city where Steph played. Not by cosmic accident, but because she simply didn't follow his career closely enough anymore to remember which team he had ended up with. During her first years in Oakland, Jessica built a reputation as an exceptional educator. Tyler Brooks, her supervisor, constantly praised her unique ability to connect with children that others considered lost or without potential. "Jessica has something special," Tyler said during an annual evaluation. "She sees possibilities where others see problems. It's like she has radar for identifying hidden talents." If Tyler knew the true origin of this ability, if he knew that Jessica had been trained for 3 years to recognize disguised greatness by observing a skinny boy from Charlotte transform frustration into fuel for excellence. It was possible to perceive that every child Jessica mentored received the same kind of obsessive attention and unwavering belief that she had dedicated to Steph years before. There was Logan Anderson, 14 years old, who everyone said had behavioral problems, but who Jessica discovered was a mathematical genius who was bored with the standard school curriculum. There was Samantha Davis, 16 years old, who seemed uninterested in studies, but who was actually struggling to balance caring for younger siblings with her own academic ambitions. Each success of her children was a small victory that filled the void left by Steph's distant growth. Jessica had found a way to channel her need to nurture potential on a much larger scale than a single friendship. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Steph Curry was building a dynasty with the Golden State Warriors. 2015 brought the first title. 2017 and 2018 brought 2 more. 2022 sealed the 4th. Each victory echoed through Oakland like waves of celebration that touched every corner of the city. Something that touches deeply is that Jessica was literally surrounded by Steph's presence. Warriors' jerseys on the streets, celebrations after victories, children imitating his three-point shot, but never made the emotional connection with the boy she had known in Charlotte. Great lives are built when we transform our pain into purpose. And both had done exactly that, channeling their past experiences into completely different ways of impacting the world. In 2018, Jessica was promoted to Executive Director of Oakland Opportunity Academy. Under her leadership, the organization expanded from 150 to more than 800 children served annually. She developed innovative programs that combined traditional education with individualized mentoring, creating a model that began being replicated in other cities. During interviews about her work, Jessica frequently spoke about the importance of seeing potential where others see problems and believing in impossible dreams. Journalists asked where this philosophy came from, and she always answered vaguely about formative experiences during adolescence. If they knew that this philosophy had been born on a basketball court in Charlotte, watching a skinny boy fight against the doubts of the entire world. In 2021, Jessica married Marcus Williams, a history teacher she met during an educational conference. Marcus deeply admired her work and frequently joked that he had fallen in love with the way she talked about her children, with the same fierce love that a mother feels for her children. In 2022, Sophia was born, their daughter. Jessica held the baby in her arms for the first time and made a silent promise. "You'll grow up knowing you can be anything you dream? Mommy will make sure of that." Naturally, this leads us to question: how many times do we reproduce in our own families the types of support we once offered to or received from other people? During all these years, Steph continued his meteoric career, but there were moments, especially after big victories or during moments of personal reflection, when he thought about the friend who had believed in him first, not with pain or deep regret, but with that soft nostalgia that arises when we remember people who were important in our formation. In occasional interviews, when asked about people who were crucial in your journey, Steph sometimes mentioned a friend from Charlotte who always believed, or someone who supported me when no one else believed. But never with enough details for Jessica, if she were watching, to be sure he was talking about her. It was impossible not to feel that both carried a shared memory that had become a soft shadow in their lives, present but never examined closely. The moment that would change everything came during an interview in November 2023. Steph was talking with Ryan Johnson, ESPN reporter, about legacy and people who had shaped his career. "Steph," Ryan asked, "when you look back at the moments that defined who you became, what people come to mind?" Steph paused for a moment with that thoughtful expression his fans knew well. "My father, of course. My mother, Isha. But, there's one person I rarely mention publicly. A friend from Charlotte who basically saved me during high school." "How do you mean, saved?" "I was ready to give up," Steph continued, his voice carrying an emotion that caught even Ryan by surprise. "Everyone told me I was too small, too weak. I was starting to believe it. But there was this girl, Jessica, who saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Jessica was at home, bathing Sophia, when the interview aired on the living room television. When she heard her name, she almost let the baby slip from her hands. "She used to come to my practices, record statistics, remind me of my potential when I forgot," Steph continued on TV. "Honestly, I don't know if I would have made it here without her." Jessica Chen, if you're watching, thank you for everything. What's most impressive is that Steph had carried her memory with such clarity that he still remembered her full name after 14 years of silence. Jessica sat on the bathroom floor, holding Sophia, and cried. Not from sadness, but from a complex emotion that mixed validation, nostalgia, pride, and a pang of something that could be called longing. Marcus found her like this 20 minutes later. "Jess, what happened?" "Remember I told you about a friend from Charlotte I helped with basketball?" she said, still processing what she had just heard. "It was him. It was Steph Curry." Marcus almost choked. "Wait, you knew Steph Curry and never told me?" "He wasn't Steph Curry when I knew him," Jessica explained. "He was just Steph. Just a boy who needed someone who believed in him." That night, Marcus convinced Jessica to look up the complete interview online. They watched it together on the laptop, and Marcus observed his wife relive memories she had carefully kept for years. "Jess," Marcus said when the interview ended, Do you realize what this means? You basically helped create one of the greatest athletes in history, and you're in the same city. Something that touches deeply is realizing that sometimes the universe places us exactly where we need to be, but only at the right moment to rediscover connections we thought were lost forever. Great lives are built when we transform our pain into purpose, and both Jessica and Steph had built extraordinary lives. Jessica had become a renowned educator who changed hundreds of lives annually. Steph had become not just an exceptional athlete, but a symbol of perseverance and humility. And now, after 14 years of silence and parallel lives in the same city, destiny was about to write a final chapter that neither could have predicted. The universe, apparently, hadn't finished telling the story of Jessica Chen and Steph Curry. And it was then that the truth finally came to light. Some moments in life are so charged with emotion that they seem to happen in slow motion, as if the universe wanted to give us time to completely absorb the magnitude of what is happening. For Steph Curry and Jessica Chen, that moment came on a cold morning of December 15, 2024, when destiny finally decided to finish the story that had begun 19 years earlier. Jessica arrived at work that morning without imagining it would be the most emotional day of her professional life. As executive director of Oakland Opportunity Academy, she had organized hundreds of events, received dozens of celebrities, and coordinated countless fundraising campaigns. But that morning would be different from everything she had ever experienced. Great reunions happen when we least expect them, but exactly when we most need them. And Jessica was about to discover that some connections are so deep they transcend time, distance, and even years of silence. Sarah Mitchell, the organization's event coordinator, ran to Jessica's office with an agitation that immediately caught her attention. "Jessica, you're not going to believe this," Sarah said, almost breathless. "We did it. Steph Curry confirmed attendance for today's event. He'll be here in 2 hours." Jessica felt her heart accelerate, but not for the reason Sarah imagined. Since the November interview, Jessica had fought against the big temptation to try contacting Steph. Part of her wanted to send a message, show up at a game, do something to reconnect. But another part, the part that had learned to protect her heart, advised her to leave the past where it was. "What kind of event is this again?" Jessica asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Believe in Dreams campaign. We're going to present our programs to potential donors, and he's going to speak about the importance of supporting quality education," Sarah explained. "Jessica, this is going to be incredible for our organization." It was possible to perceive that the universe had orchestrated that moment with almost surgical precision. Steph would come to speak about believing in impossible dreams. At the organization run by the woman who had been the first to believe in his impossible dream. Jessica spent the next 2 hours on an emotional roller coaster. Part of her was anxious to see him. Part was terrified at the possibility that he wouldn't remember her, despite the interview, and part wondered if it would be better to simply avoid the encounter. But destiny is exactly that. Situations that force us to confront what we've spent years avoiding. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Steph Curry arrived at Oakland Opportunity Academy, accompanied by his security team, advisors, and a small entourage of local journalists. Jessica watched from afar as he greeted Sarah and other board members, noticing how he seemed genuinely interested in the EBE organization's work. "He still has that energy," Jessica thought, watching how Steph interacted with the children who had been selected to meet him. Still has that way of making each person feel special. What's most impressive is how some fundamental personality characteristics remain unchanged even when everything around transforms completely. The event began in the main auditorium, with Steph giving a presentation about perseverance and the importance of having people who believe in our dreams. Jessica stayed at the back of the auditorium, watching the skinny boy from Charlotte, who had become a global icon, but who still spoke with the same genuine humility she remembered. "Success is not something we achieve alone," Steph told the audience of 200 people. "Behind every achievement, there's always someone who believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves." While he spoke, Jessica felt as if she were watching echoes of conversations they had had 19 years earlier. The same ideas about potential, about perseverance, about the importance of having someone who sees our light when we are in our darkest days. After the presentation, Steph was supposed to take a tour of the organization's facilities before lunch with major donors. Sarah was guiding the group when she stopped in front of Jessica's office. "And this is our executive director, Jessica Chen," Sarah said, opening the door. "Jessica, would you like to meet Steph Curry?" Jessica was facing away, organizing papers on her desk, when she heard the introduction. She turned slowly, preparing for a formal greeting with the superstar who had once been her best friend. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Steph froze at the office door, his expression changing from professional courtesy to absolute shock in seconds. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, and for a moment that seemed eternal, he simply looked at her as if he were seeing a ghost. "Jessica," he whispered, his voice loaded, with an emotion that made the entire entourage stop breathing. How many times in life can a whispered name carry 19 years of history, longing, regret, and unresolved love? What happened next surprised everyone present in a way none of them were prepared to witness. Steph completely ignored the cameras, the advisors, the journalists, and all the formality of the event. He walked straight to Jessica, with tears already forming in his eyes, and hugged her as if his life depended on it. "Jessica," he repeated, now crying openly. "My God, Jessica, it's really you." Something that touches deeply is witnessing the moment when a world-famous person becomes completely vulnerable, showing that beneath all the fame, there's still just a human being with genuine feelings. Jessica returned the hug, and both stood there, in the middle of her office, crying and hugging, while a room full of strangers watched one of the most emotional reunions they had ever witnessed. "I looked for you," Steph said, still hugging her. "After that interview, I tried to find you. I asked my team to research, but Jessica Chen is a common name and I didn't know where you were." "I was here," Jessica replied, laughing through tears. "I was here the whole time, in your city." Steph's team was completely bewildered. They had seen the boss emotional before, but never like this. Never with this raw vulnerability, this joy mixed with regret, this reaction that seemed to come from a place much deeper than anything related to basketball. Sarah, who had organized the event, was recording everything with her phone, instinctively realizing she was witnessing something historic. Great reunions happen when we least expect them, but exactly when we most need them. And in that moment, both realized they had needed that encounter more than they imagined. They finally separated, but Steph held Jessica's hands as if afraid she would disappear again. "Jessica, I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked. "Sorry for losing you, for letting our friendship get lost. You were the most important person in my formation, and I let life take me away from that." "Steph, you don't need to apologize," Jessica replied. "We grew up. We followed different paths. That's natural." "No, it's not natural," Steph insisted. "Losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not losing romantically," he quickly clarified, "but losing my best friend. The person who believed in me first." It was impossible not to feel the absolute sincerity in his words. This wasn't Steph Curry, the superstar, talking to the cameras. This was Steph, the boy from Charlotte, talking to the only person who had known his heart before the whole world knew his name. Daniel Patel, Steph's main advisor, tried discreetly to remind about the schedule, but Steph completely ignored him. "Jessica, tell me about your life," Steph said, pulling up a chair as if they were still teenagers talking after practice. "Tell me about everything I missed." Jessica laughed, wiping away tears. "Steph, you have an event to attend. Important people waiting for you." "No," Steph said, with a firmness that surprised his own team. "There's nothing more important than this. Nothing more important than you." Naturally, this leads us to question: how many times in life do we have the chance to correct the biggest regrets of our past? They talked for 2 hours. Steph canceled lunch with donors, rescheduled interviews, and basically stopped his life to hear about the 19 years he had missed from Jessica's life. She told him about her career, about Marcus, about Sophia, about how she had channeled everything she learned, helping him into her passion for educating children. "Jessica," Steph said, after hearing everything, "you became exactly who I always knew you would be. You're changing hundreds of lives, exactly like you changed mine." "And you," Jessica replied, "became not just the athlete I knew you would be, but an even better person than I imagined you could be." It was then that Steph did something that surprised even Jessica. "Jessica, I want to do something. Something permanent. Something that honors our friendship and the incredible work you're doing here." Steph turned to Daniel and said, "I want to create a scholarship. A permanent scholarship, in the name of our friendship. Jessica Chen and Steph Curry Foundation for Believing in Dreams. I want it to guarantee complete college education for 50 children from this organization every year, forever." The room fell into absolute silence. "Steph," Jessica whispered, That would be the least I can do," he interrupted. "Jessica, you taught me that the greatest talent we can have is believing in other people's potential. I want us to keep doing that together." What's most impressive is that Steph had instantly understood that the best way to honor their past was to create a future that would multiply the kind of impact Jessica had had on his life. Before leaving that day, Steph did one last thing that no one expected. During an impromptu interview with the journalists present, he said, "You just witnessed the most important reunion of my life. This woman, Jessica Chen, taught me that success without true friendship is empty. Today, we discovered that some friendships are so special they can be paused for 19 years and resumed as if it were yesterday." That night, Jessica called Marcus, still processing everything that had happened. "How was it?" Marcus asked. "It was redemptive," Jessica said. "It was like 19 years of what if had finally found their answer. Great reunions happen when we least expect them, but exactly when we most need them. And Jessica Chen and Steph Curry had discovered that some friendships are so fundamental they can survive anything, even growth itself." 6 months later, the Jessica Chen and Steph Curry Foundation for Believing in Dreams would be officially launched, with Steph and Jessica as co-founders promising scholarships for underprivileged children for future generations. And so, two people who once promised to be best friends forever discovered that some promises are so powerful They find a way to fulfill themselves, even when we think they were broken forever.